We last left Greece at the end of the Archaic period, and now as we enter the 5th century BC, the Classical Age begins. This video will begin our exploration of the Classical period, and we'll leave off the story with the 431 BC breakout of war between Athens and Sparta. The Ionian Greeks, who'd already prior to Persian conquest come under the rule of the kingdom of Lydia in the late 6th century BC, now under the Persians found themselves nestled on the northwestern tip of the massive Achaemenid Empire. In 499 BC, a number of Ionian polis revolted against the tyrants their Persian overlords had installed to rule them. The Ionians sought help from mainland Greeks, and while Sparta's king Cleomenes spurned them, Eretria and Athens sent forces to help, and in 498 BC, the Ionians, Eretrians, and Athenians combined to sack the Persian provincial capital of Sardis, leaving it behind in flames. In 497 BC, after the Ionians and their allies are defeated at the Battle of Ephesus, Eretria and Athens withdrew from the war. The Ionians now spent their time playing defense, but by 493 BC, the revolts had died down, and in the aftermath, in a quite favorable act to the Ionian will, the Persian general Mardonius replaced the Ionian tyrannies with democracies. But Athens would soon hear from the Persians about the part they played in the revolt. Earlier, in 507 BC, Athens had sent ambassadors to Sardis who'd expressed their fealty to the Persian Empire by offering earth and water, an offering demonstrating submission. The Athenian populace had been furious at the ambassadors and never accepted this subservient position. After Athens more than neglected their pledge of obeisance in playing a role in sacking Sardis, Herodotus claims that the Persian king Darius arranged to be reminded at each meal, "Lord, remember the Athenians." In 490 BC, Athens' time had come. The coming conflicts would provide an existential terror unlike any prior for the Athenians and those allied Greeks who bought into the idea that their notion of freedom depended on autonomy from Persia. Darius sent ambassadors over requesting submission from Athens in 490 BC, and the ambassadors were rejected. Persian ships then traversed the Aegean. Eretria is burned, and the ships next make land at Marathon. There they faced off against the badly outnumbered Athenians, who were aided by their allied Greeks from Plataea. The Athenians defeat the Persians, who retreat to their ships. The Greek troops now rush back to Athens, but Persia, instead of taking their fleet there, headed back from whence they came. Darius began to plan another, more serious campaign, but he died in 486 BC, and it was left to his son Xerxes to remember the Athenians. Before the Persians returned, the 480s BC saw some changes in Athens. It's in the 480s that the practice of ostracism began. Ostracism was a policy in place where if a sufficient amount of the citizen body voted by writing names on ostraca, that is, shards of broken pottery, then the most often voted for person would be banished from Athens for 10 years, all the while retaining his citizenship and property. By the end of the 5th century, this political action was no longer being used. Other significant changes include the shift in 487 BC from the 9 archons being elected to now being chosen by lot, and most significantly for Athenian power in the coming war with the Persians, after a major silver vein strike occurs in Attican mines, the wealth is used to build up the Athenian navy. Xerxes, king of Persia, led his army to invade Greece in 480 BC. A major force traveled inland, mirrored by the fleet traveling off the coast. Along the way, many Greek city-states pledged their fealty to the Persian king, but 31 states allied together under the military lead of Sparta to repel the invasion. The Spartans heroically made a stand to slow the Persian advance at the narrow pass of Thermopylae. But the Persians soon won the Battle of Thermopylae, though the relative success and monumental courage of the Spartans provided a moral victory for the Greeks. After hearing of the loss at Thermopylae, the Greek fleet, which had been battling the Persian fleet in the Battle of Artemisium, falls back to Salamis. The Persian fleet lost very badly to the Greeks at the Battle of Salamis, while Athens itself was abandoned and the Persians sacked the city. Xerxes now headed back to his homeland while leaving behind Mardonius in control of the Persian army. Athens is offered a peace in 479 BC, and they reject it. Mardonius began marching down with his troops, sent another offer for peace, and Athens rejected it once again. Also once again was Athens abandoned and further sacked. But when it came to actual war, the Persians lost decisively in both the land battle of Plataea and the naval battle of Mycale. With this, the major part of the war is over. Much of what we know of the Greco-Persian Wars comes from the histories by Herodotus, gift of Hera, who at this point was a child having been born in Halicarnassus around 484 BC. Despite the lack of an immediate threat of another Persian invasion, the Persian presence in northern and central Greece justified the coalition of the Delian League to kick them out. One later last hope of invasion on the part of the Persians was also suffocated by the League with their decisive win at Eurymedon in 466 BC. The Delian League started out in 478 BC as an alliance of Aegean city-states against Persia. The dominance of Athens was felt rather quickly and grew over the years as Athens transformed the League into an Athenian Empire. The Delian League battled the lingering Persians, and early on in 475 BC, they attacked Eion, which was still under Persian control, and removed the Persian military presence. Athens subsequently exported colonists to found new communities there and appropriated the mining district. On the pretext of finding the bones of the Homeric hero Theseus, the island of Skyros is conquered and enslaved and turned into a colony of Athens. In Athens, a shrine was built to house the alleged bones of Theseus that Cimon brought back. In 473 BC, Charistos was compelled to join the Delian League. In 470 BC, Naxos attempts to leave the League, but Athens captures Naxos and limits their military capacity from there on. 466 BC saw the Delian League set out and surprise the Persian army and fleet at the Eurymedon River, defeating them soundly. In 465, Thasos attempted to leave the League, and Athens besieged them until they surrendered in 463, and Thasos' military capacity was limited from there on. Meanwhile, Sparta went through a rumble in 464 BC when an earthquake killed many Spartans. In the aftermath, the Messenian Helots broke out in rebellion. In 462, Sparta reached out to Athens for military help in quashing the revolt, and with Cimon's persuasion, the Athenians sent troops over to help. But the Spartans changed their mind and spurned the Athenians, sending their troops back to Athens. In 461 BC, favorable to Sparta, Cimon was ostracized. The removal of Cimon from the political world empowered Pericles, who viewed Sparta far less favorably. In 461 as well, Ephialtes, who'd successfully put forth measures that removed much of the judicial power of the Areopagus, was assassinated. Around this time, Thucydides, the Athenian historian, who'd later write his History of the Peloponnesian War, was born. Also around this time, Hippocrates the physician was born on the southeastern Aegean island of Kos. Around 460 BC, Athens entered into two new fronts. From 460 to 446 BC, Athens and Sparta battled on and off in the First Peloponnesian War. There were a number of years of respite after Cimon returned from his ostracism, and a 5-year peace was agreed to in 451. But war re-arose before the 5 years had passed. The second front that opened up around 460 was farther south than Athenian forces had yet fought, as Egyptian envoys came seeking aid from Athens in their attempt to oust Persia from Egypt. The Athenian fleet under Charatimides makes its way down south to join in. Early on, they saw major success, and Athens' power grew further. But things would soon turn disastrous. In 455 BC, they lost badly to the Persians, losing many men and ships, closing off with the disastrous Battle of Mendesium. The great tragedian Aeschylus was finishing his competitive playwriting days around this time as well, and it's from around 458 BC that one of his works, the Oresteia, which is the only almost entirely complete Greek trilogy of plays to survive, is performed. Oresteia took first place at Athens' Dionysia festival. Further revolts against Athens went down in 454 when Erythrae and Miletus rebelled against the Delian League. Athens then had the Delian League's treasury transferred from the League's namesake Delos to its imperial master, Athens. It's around 450 BC that the great sophist, or wise man, Protagoras, who you might know for his idea that man is the measure of all things, moves to Athens. Many Athenians came to be weary and critical of the sophists, whose relativistic ideas were considered a deep threat to the Athenian worldview and lifeway. Another thinker around at this time, he'd already been around in Athens for a while, is Anaxagoras, who fancied the sun to be a fiery mass. It might be that in 449 BC, Athens and Persia came to a peace agreement known as the Peace of Callias, named for the man alleged to have negotiated it, brother-in-law of Cimon, Callias. And in 446 BC, Athens and Sparta agreed to a 30-year peace treaty, ending the First Peloponnesian War. The Athenian Empire was flourishing now. Construction of the Parthenon, a temple for Athena, began in 447 BC. This was followed by the construction of the Propylaea, which began in 437 BC. 435 BC saw construction of the Erechtheum begin. More rebellions occurred during this time as well. Chalcis rebelled against the Delian League in 446 BC, and Athens compelled them back. In 440, Delian League member Samos refused to follow Athenian policy, and Athens sent troops, and Samos surrendered in 439. It's likely in 441 BC that Sophocles' tragedy Antigone was performed at the Dionysia. Around 5 years earlier was born a man who'd go on to be a great playwright in the Old Comedy period of ancient Greek comedy, Aristophanes. Euripides' tragedy Medea was performed at the Dionysia in 431 BC. The Second Peloponnesian War began in 431 BC when Sparta, after having already warned Athens to back off from their anti-Corinthian efforts or see war, declared war on Athens, saying that Sparta would free Greece from Athenian oppression. In the years leading up to this action, Corcyra, with their sizable navy, had entered into allyship with Athens in 433, and in 432, Athens had placed economic sanctions on Megara, barring their traders from Athenian ports and markets. We'll encounter the coming period in Greek history, from the start of the Peloponnesian War up until the birth of Alexander, in the coming video.